ministered to the sick, contracted cholera herself, but she was one of the lucky ones and she recovered from it. You know, if she had done nothing else in her life, she'd be a footnote somewhere for her bravery and her good work in those terrible years during the cholera epidemic in New York City. But she's remembered by those who know her for so many other things. Fanny Crosby was the first woman to address the United States Congress. Would you think that would earn her some note in history texts? People would think we'd want to know. Who was the first woman to address the United States Congress and why did they invite her? Fanny Crosby also holds the record to this day for having written the lyrics to more songs, almost all in her case were hymns, than any other person in the history of humanity. Just hymns alone, she wrote almost 9,000 hymns. On any given Sunday, there may still be a few million Americans singing "To God Be the Glory" or "Blessed Assurance," two of her better known hymns. How many have sung one or both of those? Okay. Fanny Crosby also, to the best of the knowledge of historians, probably met more American presidents than any other person in American history, living or dead. How many here could say they've met, say, 5 American presidents? Anybody? That would be quite a feat, wouldn't it? You'd almost have to maybe be a White House butler to have met that many. But Fanny Crosby met every single president, some after they left the White House, as in the case of the very first one I mentioned, John Quincy Adams. He went on, after serving one term as president, to serve 17 years as a member of Congress from Massachusetts. She met every president from John Quincy Adams through and including Woodrow Wilson. That's 21 of the 44 presidents we've had. It's almost unimaginable that one person could have met so many American presidents. Well, that raises the question, why? What was it that she did that caught such attention and that caused many of those men actually to seek her and to come to know her? I didn't tell you yet the most important thing about Fanny Crosby. She never had any recollection of having seen anything. She was completely blind from the age of 6 months. Never saw a thing. And when she spoke to Congress, what do you suppose her message was? It was not, "I have a handicap, where's my check?" It was not, "Do something for me." Her message was, all of us, regardless of the obstacles and the barriers we face, are called to be the best we can be at everything we do, to be an example for others. She was regarded by millions of Americans right up to the day of her passing and for years thereafter as near saintly because of the way she conducted her life and of the character that she exhibited. I think it's important that we remember people that we can regard as real heroes because of their exemplary character. How can we teach character if we don't, first of all, practice it ourselves? And secondly, if we don't share stories of those who had it by the boatload with young people. Fanny Crosby should rank as should be one of the best known Americans of all time. But sadly, barely 100 years since she passed on, most Americans have forgotten who she was. That's a sad commentary. Second person I want to tell you about from the 19th century, my guess is this will be a much better known name to you, Harriet Tubman. Some of you know Harriet Tubman, or know of her, yes. Remarkable woman whose name has been put in the hopper for the either the $10 or the $20 bill that will carry the image of a woman beginning in 2020. And I'd say it's about time we have a woman on one note or more of our currency, and I think she'd be a great candidate, as would people like Abigail Adams or Dolly Madison, unifying figures. But in the case of Harriet Tubman, it would be hard to say she doesn't deserve that kind of recognition. She was perhaps the most renowned conductor of the famous Underground Railroad, having been a former slave herself who traveled on this underground network to escape slavery and to arrive in the North. As many as 100,000 slaves risked life and limb to travel the routes of the Underground Railroad. It was clearly the most dangerous railroad in the world. She was born in 1820 in Maryland. Her name was Araminta Harriet Ross, later married a man named Tubman. And she survived the brutalities of slavery for her first 29 years. 3 of her sisters had been sold to distant plantation owners. She herself carried scars from frequent whippings. She carried those scars for her entire life. Once, as a slave, when she was fell into trouble with her slave master, she was literally bashed in the head with a 2-pound metal weight, which caused almost lifelong pain and migraines and buzzing in her ears. But I'll come back to that because it was a problem that was ultimately solved in a rather amazing way. It was in 1849, at the age of 29, that Harriet Tubman bolted for freedom, made her way from Maryland to the free state of Pennsylvania and to the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Here's what she later said, or later wrote. She said, "I had crossed the line of which I had so long been dreaming. I was free, but I was a stranger in a strange land, and my home, after all, was down in the old cabin quarter with the old folks and my brothers and sisters. But to this solemn resolution I came. I was free, and they should be free also. I would make a home for them in the North, and the Lord helping me, I would bring them all here. Oh, how I prayed then, lying all alone on the cold, damp ground. Oh, dear Lord, I said, I haven't got no friend but you. Come to my help, Lord, for I'm in trouble. Oh, Lord, you've been with me in 6 troubles. Don't desert me in the 7th." She bravely ventured 13 times back into slave states to personally escort at least 70 escapees to northern states and to Canada. She later said, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I've never lost a passenger." And those passengers included her aging parents, her 3 brothers, and their wives, many of their children, and dozens of others. She even, during the Civil War, this is not well known, but she even became the war's first woman to lead an armed expedition where she guided the Combahee Raid, an expedition that liberated more than 700 slaves in South Carolina. The great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, in August of 1868, in a famous letter to Tubman, paid tribute to her heroism, and I don't know anybody who's ever said it any better. But speaking of Tubman, in his letter, he said, quote, "Most that I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, have labored in a private way. I have wrought in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd, the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most that you have done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scarred, and footsore bondsmen and women, whom you have led out of the house of bondage, and whose heartfelt God bless you has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism." Well, Harriet Tubman, after the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, didn't retire. She continued to work, even though she earned a mere pittance, but she spent so many hours of almost every day in volunteer work caring for others, whether they be sick, aged, former slaves, people of all stripes. She often spoke publicly on behalf of the women's right to vote. And I mentioned earlier about the problem she had after the beating with that metal object. It was in the 1870s, when she was in her 50s, I'm sorry, I got the year wrong. It was in the 1890s, when she was in her 70s, that she decided to have brain surgery. Think about this, brain surgery in the 1890s to take care of the migraines and the other issues that she struggled with for so many decades. But the most amazing thing, and I can't explain this, except to say she was one tough bird, but she refused anesthesia. And instead, she simply requested a bullet. She said, all I need is to bite down on the bullet. And they did the surgery. It was successful. And she lived another 15 years until she died in 1913 at the age of 91. And she's quoted as saying, she often talked about her surgery years thereafter, and she's quoted as saying, they sawed open my skull and raised it up, and now it feels a lot more comfortable. What a tough bird Harriet Tubman was, for sure. A real hero, devoted to the liberty of others throughout most of her adult life. The third person I want to tell you about, also from the 19th century, is someone that I often refer to as my favorite president. We're starting to get into the thick of a presidential campaign. Maybe we should look back at our history and find out, well, who are some of the better ones? Who are the ones that maybe the candidates today should look to emulate? If you're interested in presidential trivia, incidentally, I'll share a couple, just to digress for a moment, some interesting little tidbits. Do you know that there are two men living today, brothers, 186, 191, who can honestly say that their grandfather was President of the United States 174 years ago. Think of that, just 2 generations removed. Their grandfather became president in 1841. And that man's name, any guesses? John Tyler. John Tyler, who became president upon the death, after 1 month in office, of William Henry Harrison. John Tyler, his first wife died, and late in life, he and his second wife, he was well in his 70s, had a son. And then that son, in his 70s, with his wife, had 2 sons. And those are the 2 who are still living today. And it gets even stranger because they can not only say that their grandfather was president 174 years ago, they can also say that their great-grandfather was Thomas Jefferson's college roommate. Isn't that amazing? Another little bit of presidential trivia. There's only one person in American history who was an eyewitness to one presidential assassination and was quickly on the scene for 2 others. This so affected him, in fact, that in spite of his prominence, he lived for about 25 years after that 3rd episode. And in spite of his prominence and being asked many times to attend events where the President of the United States would be, his answer always was, nope, I'm not coming. Bad things happen when I do. Anybody know who that was? Famous last name? Robert Todd Lincoln, who was not present at Ford's Theater that night in April 1865, but was invited by his father. He simply had declined the invitation, but he was quickly on the scene. But some, less than 20 years later, he was serving as Secretary of War in the cabinet of James Garfield, who asked him to pick him up at the train station in, I think it was Baltimore, and was not only present, but was a few feet away when Garfield was shot. And then less than 2 decades later, or thereabouts, he was at the Buffalo Exposition when William McKinley was shot. And he lived until the mid-1920s. And because he was the son of Abraham Lincoln, as you might imagine, he would be on everybody's invite list, every presidential inauguration, whatever. But he refused to go to any event where the president would appear because of those episodes. But I don't know, that's just a little interesting trivia there. But I want to tell you about a man that I've regarded for a long time as my favorite. Not necessarily that he was the best. I do put him in the top half dozen best, but that list kind of fluctuates from time to time. But he's one of our very best, but my personal favorite, because I've enjoyed